Merry Christmas from the Firepunk crew.
Alright guys, Merry Christmas. 2 days before Christmas here at Firepunk. It's starting to feel like Christmas around here. We've got a short day today, getting ready to go to do our Christmas banquet tonight. And then we'll be off through Christmas. And just looking forward to spending time with our families and having a little bit of time off. But for the giveaway, our winner from last week is Derek Arthur. So get in touch with us and we'll get you hooked up with all of your Jack's Wax and Hot Shot goodies, and then also a hoodie and a hat. Alright, so this week's Christmas gift is $300 cash and a Firepunk can koozie. So to enter that drawing, just comment your full name below the video here, and like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and also like our Facebook page. So this is just our way to show our appreciation to you guys, give it forward, and just to celebrate the Christmas season. Hope you all have a great Christmas. Alright guys, with coming back from the dyno last week with the executioner motor, we've just been seeing a number of different questions and maybe some misconceptions, and there's some different things out there. So we thought we'd address kind of some of the things that we're trying to accomplish on the dyno, and why we do what we do, and some of that different stuff. So what did we learn last week? Is there anything, like one thing in particular that really stuck out to you? What's your best thing about going to the dyno last week?
Probably the best thing was learning air-fuel ratios. Last year we always wanted to race on the lean side. With gas vehicles, you can't really run them that lean, you'll melt a piston. With a diesel, if you have more air, more oxygen than you have fuel, you can stay on the lean side, your exhaust gas temperatures are cooler. That's why if you run a compound turbo setup on your tow truck, your EGTs are easy to maintain. If you run a single 475, your exhaust gas temperatures are higher because you're not moving as much air at that lower RPM. So we kind of hit our targeted air-fuel ratio that we know will be able to make that engine survive on the track next year. And now we're going to equip the truck with an oxygen sensor so that in real time we can make a pass, come back and see what our air-fuel ratio is, and if it doesn't hit our target, we'll know how to adjust for the next round.
Right, and that's one of the big differences in what we're doing versus what sled pullers do. Sled pullers with mechanical injection, they're always on the fat side of the curve, right?
Right.
So that in turn, fat in diesel keeps it cool, or really lean keeps it cool. But right up the middle is where you make a lot of power there,
right,
but you also make a lot of heat there. So yeah,
with a sled pull application, so say like you're a 3.0 smoothbore or some kind of limited air, we will actually cool the cylinder with over-fueling. So we did that on the Executioner last week by taking the single 98mm turbo, and we maxed it out on fuel only. So we made, what, 2,044 horsepower on fuel only, and we kept it EGTs at like 1,450, 1,500 degrees at like a 12-to-1 air-fuel ratio. So it was actually putting enough fuel in to make the power, and then it put extra fuel in to actually cool the cylinder, and everything stayed cool. Then, and our cylinder pressure was actually a little bit higher that way than going to the lean side of the curve, where we used a lot less fuel and a lot more nitrous, and stayed like we're past 22-to-1 air-fuel ratio, and because there's less fuel particles in the cylinder, so there's a little bit less compression, and our peak cylinder pressure was actually a little bit lower on the lean side of the curve.
Right. So another thing that we get quite a bit on the internet is, why don't we have triple turbos and a big air-to-water intercooler and a mechanical injection? I mean, that makes 3,500 horsepower all day long. Why aren't we doing that?
That's mostly weight. This is application again. So super stock pullers, they are not allowed to run nitrous. So they have to make all the power that they can with an air-to-water intercooler to make the air as dense as possible. They're getting it down to 60-degree intake air temperature. We're doing that with nitrous. So we were actually able to see our cylinder pressure before the combustion happened. We were able to see the combustion or cylinder pressure lower when we turned the second kit on, and then again it lowered again when we turned the third kit on. So the nitrous going in the cylinder was enough colder that it was actually condensing the air and lowering the pressure before the fuel hit, and it's doing the same thing that an air-to-water intercooler does, and it doesn't add 200 pounds to our race vehicle. Like racing on a pro mod, it's expensive to lose weight. So every bit of weight that we can save, we're going to do it, and that is why we chose the single turbo and nitrous combination for the Executioner. Was for the application.
Sure. Talk a little bit about mechanical versus common rail injection. Where are we at on the common rail fuel system? Like, do we have fuel left, or are we pretty much tapped out? Like, do we think we can push this thing further? Do you think, are we close to making the power that a mechanical could if we bolted up big triple turbos and did that kind of a setup?
Well, I'm not going to say we can because we haven't done it. So until we do it, I can't make any claims. But we do have a lot of fuel quantity available. We made our 3,214 horsepower with about 80% of the available fuel quantity that we had for the two 14mm XG CP3s. So we did max out the fuel system when we were on fuel only. We turned it all the way up to like 650 milligrams and ran it all the way to 5,800 RPM, and we're able to still maintain rail pressure and still had 5% of the pump duty cycle left. So if we took that same percentage from our 3,214 horsepower and added that fuel quantity and added an equal amount of nitrous, we would have enough fuel quantity currently to make like 3,800 horsepower on nitrous in a perfect world. But again,
it's all easier said than done.
Right.
Yeah.
At this point, we've used about 2,800 horsepower on the track last year, and there was a lot of tracks that we weren't able to apply all that power. It's all about power management, and that's where the mechanical versus the common rail battle distinguishes itself. So when you're talking about just raw horsepower, you can build a 17mm Sigma pump, big Triple HX82s, you can go out and rip a big number, you can sled pull with it, but then your power control becomes a lot about clutch control, and on the drag strip, we need power management. Right. So in the first 2.5 seconds, we're launching, letting off the button at around 1,000 horsepower and ramping it into 3,000 horsepower. And with a mechanical injected engine, that's really, really hard to do, and that's what makes a common rail king on the drag strip application. So we think common rail is better simply because of the application. When you're talking about straight up horsepower, I'm sure you can do it with mechanical, but you will not, and I'll bet you on this, you will not find a mechanical motor with Triple HX82s that's going to play ball with the S10 in the staging lane. So if you don't believe it, build one, catch me in the lanes, and we'll see who's right.
Another one that I got, like, how did we have the dyno set up? Were we doing up sweeps, down sweeps, doing holds, and then also the torque question gets asked a lot. So.
Right. We started all of our tests with doing 4,500 to 5,500 RPM sweeps. So basically you come up to 4,500 RPM, you overshoot it a little bit, hit load, and it sucks it down to 4,500, goes to full power, then it sweeps it to 5,500, you let off, you see your whole power curve. And we did that for all of our injector testing, turbo testing, just so we could see power curves, so we could see what cylinder pressure did through the RPM, and we could dial in a timing table. Then we added nitrous, and as we added nitrous, we could tell really quickly if it played a big part in how cylinder pressure was affected, how it burned the fuel. So once we knew what we needed to change in the timing curve with nitrous, then instead of doing long sweeps, we're not looking to break an engine. So then we did 5,000 RPM holds. So now we're coming up to 5,000 RPM. You're overshooting it like 5,200. You apply a load to the dyno, and it pulls it down to 5,000 RPM while you're full throttle. And we get a 3 to 4 second wide open throttle pull where it makes a graph to where we can see as each nitrous kit comes on how it changes their fuel ratio, what our cylinder pressure does, and it gives us a good target. So most of our 2,800 to 3,200 horsepower pulls was a 5,000 RPM hold. That was about 4 seconds long, and you would see the RPM go from like 5,200 suck down to 5,000, and that's why our torque numbers were not really high, because at 5,200 to 52 RPM, your horsepower and your torque is always the same. So you can always calculate your torque number. Horsepower equals torque times RPM divided by 5252. So it's literally a mathematical equation. If when we were able to make within 50 horsepower, we actually made 50 horsepower more at 5,000 RPM than we did at 4,500. So if you go down to 4,500 or 4,000 and calculate, and that engine's going to make over 4,000 foot-pounds, but we're not trying to make it live down there. We're trying to, we want to shift that truck at 5,600 RPM, pull it down to 4,600, that be our RPM curve, keep it out of that peak torque. That saves transmission parts, it saves
everything.
Yes, peak cylinder pressure goes up substantially as your piston speed slows down. So that's why we're not seeing that huge torque number on the dyno. Even though when we're on the track and that thing makes a 5,500 to 4,500 RPM shift, you're going to see a torque just go through the roof on that RPM drop.
Right, and that's another big difference between sled pulling and between drag racing, is the sled pullers are able to get their RPMs up before they ever come off the line, and they're always wound out, and then they never have that big RPM drop during a shift or something like that. So that's something we've learned pretty quickly. It's really in our shifts when we lose all that RPM. That's right when the diesel loves to do work. This thing responds when you pull it down, but that's also when you break parts.
Right.
So that's part of the reason we tried to build a stronger block, and but now we're also trying to make so that we can make good power up higher, so we don't have to go down there near as much. But we have what, a 1,200 RPM window from our max RPM to when we do a shift, it'll suck it down quite a bit. So the higher we can push that up, the less we have to pull it down into that torque. So
the billet engine with the 12 ports, 1 port per valve, definitely plays nicer at higher RPM than the other setup did last year. And the main thing that we saw was a 50 horsepower gain from 4,500 to 5,000, where last year we lost about 50 horsepower going from 4,500 to 5,000. And so we were able to maintain our power curve, move it to the right, and it just plays nicer up there. Another thing with power and sled pulling, everybody talks about huge numbers, and numbers are only good if you can apply it. So sled pulling, you talk about the super stock pullers that can make 3,300 horsepower. They never actually use 3,300 horsepower, maybe like 1 or 2 tracks a year that they can actually load the engine up, because about every time they bend the stick over, it just goes straight to 5,500 RPM, blows the tires off. And talking to a lot of those guys, they're more about control. So they're starting to ask for what we have. So you're going to see that the more control that the mechanical guys see that the common rail has, you're going to start seeing them wanting it a little bit more. So I think we have no problem making 25 to 2,800 horsepower on fuel and have a lot more throttle control in the common rail system than you do in mechanical. I'm not saying that it'd be better. I would love to build a super stock and find out, but I don't have that much time, and 30 mile an hour is so boring compared to 200. So maybe if Shane Kellogg or Justin Gearhart or one of those guys would just get off their heinies and we'll help you build a common rail, and we'll see if it plays well.
Yeah, so yeah, and also, like, just looking on comments on the internet, everybody has all these great ideas. Why don't you try this, and why don't you try that? Ultimately, it comes down to time and money, right? Like, we would have kept dynoing for another 4 days with all the ideas that we had, but at some point we need to get back to work and quit spending money. And yeah,
the dyno, it's very expensive. I mean, we show up to the engine dyno, and the time you show up till the time every time you're there and working, it's $100 an hour. So that's split between a couple people that were doing some R&D work, and that is why some of the information we just don't pass out, because it is expensive to learn this information. I love to share information, but I do want to keep that for our paying customers, so that we can, all the people that work with us, we can share that knowledge that we've learned with them. Not saying that it's the right way. There's a lot of different ways to make horsepower. I'm not going to say it's the only way. There's a lot of different ways to make horsepower, but from what we've learned, this seems to be the best for our application. So if a customer comes to me with a different application, we'll probably take a little different approach. But for drag racing, this seems to be the best method.
Yep.
Another thing with nitrous, a lot of people are discrediting numbers because there's nitrous involved. And you have to remember, nitrous is just oxygen-rich air. So nitrous has 30% oxygen content, whereas the air we breathe is like a 21% oxygen content. So for the same amount of air, you have 10% more oxygen going into your system. With boost, That's why you run 3 triple turbos. You condense all that air so you can get all that oxygen in the cylinder every time the intake valve opens.
It's all about air density.
Air density. Yeah. And Gale Banks has been on this kick for a long time, and he's 100% right, because the more oxygen you can get in the cylinder, the better off you are. Yeah. So nitrous is simply oxygen. It is not easy to make horsepower with well, you add nitrous to about any engine, it's going to make horsepower pretty easy, but it's not easy to, you still have to do the whole setup to make it live. Otherwise, your exhaust gas temperatures go through the roof and you melt a piston. So, well, people that say, oh, I took a 600 horsepower street truck, cracked nitrous to it, and it makes 1500, well, you're wrong unless you have 1500 horsepower worth of fuel and you have a stock turbo. Then, yeah, now you're just adding enough oxygen to finally burn it. It still takes the power plant to hold it. It still takes a valve train to hold it. You still have to move the air through the head. I mean, there's a lot of things that play a part into it. So nitrous is not a cheating way to make horsepower. It is simply just more rich in oxygen than air, and it weighs a lot less than 3 big turbos do. So we put our turbos in a bottle and feed it in the intake port.
I mean, really, we don't have space for 3 big turbos on the truck, even if we wanted to.
Yeah, we had to make a custom manifold just to clear the main front frame of the truck. On a pro mod like this, it is hard to build a big power setup with the space that we have.
So hopefully that answers a bunch of questions that you guys have been asking in the last week. All in all, we had a really good trip to the dyno. We kind of had hope for that at least 3,000 horsepower number when we went. We were able to hit that plus a little bit more. So I know it's not the biggest number that's ever been made, but we're happy with that. It's more power than what we had last year. So now the easy part's done. Now we need to do the hard part of making the chassis do work. So we've got a lot of work left this winter, trying to get everything. It's gonna, by taking that weight off of the engine, which is about, we're guessing it's gonna be about 225 pounds or so, and most of that's gonna be coming off the front of the truck, obviously. So now it changes our weight bias a good bit, so we have to try to move some stuff around to try to make so that the nose isn't too light now, which, weird as that sounds, we've always fought a heavy nose. So work on some of that stuff, and then we want to work on getting chassis dialed in and see if we can get our 60 foot to where they need to be, and be able to use this power going down the track next year.
So we got a bunch of work cut out for us, moving weight around, and just because you have horsepower doesn't mean you go faster. You got to get it to the track and prove that you can use it. So here's the 2020 season, and hopefully we can harness some of that new horsepower and set some new records.
See y'all at the track in a few months.
Yes, sir.